My name is Dan Seghetti. Like I said, I'm a cloud solutions engineer at Trend Micro. Have been here for about 2.5 years now. Prior to that, worked as a um, technical operations engineer at a company called Audible. May have heard of them, the audiobook subsidiary of Amazon. And prior to that, as a systems administrator at a startup out of Connecticut. If you're in the MSP market, you may have heard of Datto, something along those lines. Definitely have a lot of experience in the end user management field, as well as going through server administration and onboarding different services. So looking at the registrant list, I know a lot of you guys are in the same kind of boat. So always good to meet you and happy to go through this demonstration with you. I don't have a lot of slides. I generally just want to give you guys an idea getting started that conformity is one piece of a big pie that we have here at Trend Micro called Cloud One. And Cloud One, to put in layman's terms, is basically the accumulation of the past 5 to 10 years worth of products that Trend Micro has either developed in-house or acquired by building this platform where you can have a single sign-on spot to meet all your different cloud security challenges. What I mean by that is there's a little something for everything. Let's say workload security, you have EC2 instances that you're trying to secure, or you're in the container space and you're looking to secure those containers and scan those. Something a little bit for everybody here, including conformity. And conformity is a CSPM solution. And CSPM basically stands for Cloud Security and Posture Management. If you guys didn't know that already, make sure this is still sharing. And what we're doing with cloud security and posture management is basically looking for misconfigurations. And what is a misconfiguration is usually a great place to start. Well, misconfigurations can be anything that is set up inside of your AWS or Azure accounts that could lead to unnecessary risk within the configuration of the services inside of AWS and Azure, right? Between January 1st, 2018 and December 31st in 2019 across the globe, there are over 196 separate data breaches, and they were all found to be primarily caused by misconfigurations in the cloud services themselves. S3 being a big culprit of that we always see in the news, a storage service, right? But there are other configurations in there as well that can lead us to unnecessary risk inside the cloud. Right. So that's the name of the game, is that we're trying to limit these cloud services themselves as being threats to the environment. If you guys have Cloud Center of Excellence, or if you guys have operational excellence teams within your organizations, typically, we'll start with the low-hanging fruit first, which is, typically service outages, things of that nature. But eventually, we'll move into this kind of cloud misconfigurations and making sure that all of the infrastructure that we're standing up in AWS and in Azure is built to, some kind of security standard, whether it be the AWS well-architected framework, or if you have another compliance measure that you're looking to achieve as well. I give a couple examples. I'm referencing here in this slide the most common cloud security breaches that we found in the last year. We basically utilized our own data from Conformity to look at the top 10 AWS as well as Azure misconfiguration rates regarding to the AWS services. I'll go through a couple of them inside the actual demo, but a quick example of one that I always like to pick on is EC2. Typically, with EC2, and being one of the first services that a lot of folks get their hands on, it's easy to misconfigure something within EC2. Basically, we go to the AWS console, we go to EC2, we go to spin up an AMI, select usually Amazon Linux if we're getting into Linux or Windows. And from there, we have to go through some settings. There's like 5 pages of settings. It's not painstaking, but sometimes it can be a little redundant. Let's say that we go through, page 1 where we select the AMI, page 2 where we basically set up the metadata and, how this instance will be configured, how many instances we're throwing up, etc. We go through storage, tags. And at the very end of that process, we end up assigning a security group to it. Now, from an ops perspective, if we put our ops hats on, typically we want to make sure things work before we go in and secure them. It's just the nature of the game most of the times. It's just build it up in a sandbox and then see if it works. Oftentimes we don't get to step 2, right, with the security piece of it. We just kind of say, all right, it's working, and then we move on. The one that I've seen common in organizations that are just adopting these technologies is EC2 with these security groups, is saying, okay, we have a security group that's open to the internet over any protocol. And it's just kind of sitting there. There's nothing that jumps off the page to you to say, you should create this with these types of rules instead. It just is sitting there configured in that state. That's kind of what we're looking at with that. So with that, I'll jump into cloud conformity and how we're basically going to be resolving those issues. So if I share my screen over to my Firefox window, go ahead. You'll see I've logged into Cloud One and I'm at the conformity screen. This is there's a whole bunch of different services within Cloud One that we've already kind of gone over a little bit. But you see, once I log in, I get my AWS account. It's here on the left-hand side. If you had other accounts that you also wanted to look at, you can add them in here as well. Let's say you're an organization with 50 AWS accounts. You can connect all 50 in here as well. Or if you have Azure mixed in, GCP, et cetera, you can add those accounts in and they'll each have their own listing underneath on the left-hand side in the sidebar here. You can create groups, all those types of things. But I'm an admin and I'm just kind of getting used to, conformity and AWS. What am I kind of looking for inside of this dashboard? The first thing that jumps off the page to me is that I'm 69% compliant. I've had 999 failures and over 2,000 succeeded rule checks. What that breaks down to is that we're basically taking our rule database, getting a read-only access into your AWS environment and checking the metadata against those rules and then displaying them to you in this kind of dashboard. There's also a feature-rich API, which you can also utilize to interact with this tool. But this is kind of the medium that we're choosing to interact with and get the idea out of these misconfigurations, right? So from here, what I'll typically do is go in and browse all checks. That brings me to a couple different navigational buttons here. I get to see the rules, the resources, and the standards and frameworks. But from let's take I told you guys about the top 10 AWS misconfigurations before. Let's take a look at one of the highest volume checks that we found in that report. If I go to rules and I search AMI, and surprisingly enough, one of the most common ones that we find is AWS AMI encryption. And it basically comes down to AMIs that we're hosting within AWS aren't encrypted. Which can lead to, obviously, if you can get to that AMI in a RESTful state, you can look at what data is living on that AMI. You can definitely, it can wreak havoc in there as well. EBS volumes is another common one that's in there. But what can I do with conformity here? You can see that there's some information about it. A message that gives us, the AMI and the tag is not encrypted. What account is it in? What region is it in? And what's the link to the resource? It links me directly to the resource that has the AMI there. I can go in and suppress that rule, that one individual finding. So let's say you are setting up an AMI and you do want it to be unencrypted for some reason. Or another good example would be an S3 bucket that you're using to serve a website. That's going to get triggered on conformity to say you don't have public access disabled inside of this S3 bucket. You can go in, check that suppression, check a time frame for it, make some notes. Maybe somebody opened a ticket to make sure that this resource was configured this way, and you can suppress that check. Most importantly, you can come into any of these rule findings and click the resolve button. What that resolve button brings to us is the capability of looking at a knowledge base that shows us why that rule was, first of all, even introduced into conformity in the first place. Let's say, this is ensuring that our AMIs are encrypted to fulfill compliance requirements for data at rest. Encryption and decryption is handled transparently. It doesn't require any additional actions from your applications. So it's an easy thing to toggle on and have configured, which will help you meet, PCI, HIPAA, GDPR, et cetera. Most importantly, it's just raising your own security bar internally as well. So we get that blurb, but we also get the capability of figuring out, how do we audit for this? We don't have to go through reading, articles or GitHub pages. We can come right to the findings here and look at both using the AWS console and the CLI, how we can go through and audit for that. And then last but not least, my favorite part of this, and what I wish I had when I was a systems admin, was the remediation guides. So the idea here is that, everybody, you may have certifications in AWS. A lot of this stuff may come naturally to you, just utilizing the services day to day. But sometimes it's good to just have documentation around that shows you how should we remediate this configuration to the best possible outcome for the well-architected framework, for HIPAA, for PCI, et cetera, right? And it gives us two options. We can use the AWS console or the AWS CLI, and it will guide us from A to Z on what we need to do in order to encrypt the EBS volumes. What do we need to do to encrypt the AMI, and follow step by step what we need to do from that perspective to get this task done. I would imagine, and I know some customers that use this to raise their technical bench. If folks aren't familiar with AWS or are just starting to work in the sandboxes and the dev accounts, and they're starting to move into prod and they're getting tickets assigned to them, it's a great resource to have just to go through and be able to resolve tickets and look at the documentation that we have provided here. Last but not least, what I kind of just wanted to highlight for us, maybe two more things, is the standard and framework. Let's say you are an organization and you're looking to build to the AWS well-architected framework. What you can do is, let's remove the my query here. This is a query box, by the way. You can kind of customize your queries within here to search through parse through the results. But let's say, I'm looking for the well-architected framework. I can look at my operational excellence pillar. I can look at the security pillar, the data protection pillar, the reliability pillars, and just look through each of them and see where can I make improvements. For me, a lot of monitoring of my workload resources. I have a lot of issues there. How do I implement change? I have a lot of failures there. And you can go through and basically say, all right, what are the rules that I need to go in and change in order to meet this pillar better? What do I need to enable? What do I need to disable? Or let's say I'm an organization that has to adhere to, maybe HIPAA, right? I can look at the results of what a HIPAA audit may look like against my cloud environment. I can ensure confidentiality, integrity, and availability here, and look at through each of the rule findings and what they map to when it comes to those frameworks. So just something to help us out from that perspective. We have a feature-rich dashboard. It's going to show you, what regions are most affected by certain rules, what your compliance evolution is over time. Always good to have a report from that perspective. But we can also, and what I find really valuable for ops teams is we can communicate with you from the conformity dashboard here. So what we can do is update our communication settings. And let's say I have product owners that are responsible for the AWS configurations inside of these individual accounts. Or you're utilizing tags, which is always a good thing, and you can tag certain resources to product owners. You can inform those product owners when there are new findings for their tagged products in AWS that are misconfigured. So you can optimize that kind of workflow to inform people when they may be seeing a ticket come their way, or when something else is raised that may be a security risk for the organization. We have email, Slack, PagerDuty. You guys can see all the different workflows. SNS is a very powerful one that can automate a lot of the remediation steps and things along those lines. It's definitely a powerful tool as far as communication goes. And then last but not least, we can also look at real-time monitoring. So by default, you'll see that this bot runs every 50 or 60 minutes. You can change that to be however long or short you'd like it to be. With real-time monitoring enabled, we'll actually watch the cloud watch logs and cloud trails to monitor for any changes that are happening live in the environment. So maybe you don't want to find out in the hour that an EC2 instance was stood up and it has opened to the public. Maybe you want to find out immediately after somebody stands up that misconfiguration. You could do that with real-time threat monitoring as well. And that's pretty much everything that I wanted to go over as far as the conformity bot goes. I guess the last kind of piece that I would leave you with, if I can change my view real quick, is that there are, the conformity dashboard is definitely where a lot of folks will start to, interact with the tool, but there are other places that you can kind of hook conformity into throughout your process to kind of optimize optimize your environment here. So let me just share back to this PowerPoint slide. And we obviously have the conformity bot that's running in Cloud One. You can see the results from that perspective, but we also have places to hook in earlier. We have an IDE plugin with VS Code. So let's say we have a Terraform template. Let's say we have a YAML document that we're going to stand up within AWS. We can scan that to see what kind of misconfigurations are happening earlier on in the process before it even gets deployed. So we're proactive and not reactive. We have a GitHub Actions integration. So let's say we find some misconfigurations that we're about to stand up. We can take action on those there as well. And then last but not least, the template scanner, like I said, it goes through the API, so we can scan templates that exist in GitHub, GitLab. We have a Jenkins plugin. So we can move earlier on and scan these templates before you guys end up deploying them. And with that, I would say that that's probably a bunch of information that you guys just absorbed, but I'm happy to take questions and happy to see if you guys have any.
Awesome. Thanks for a great demo, Dan.
Absolutely.
So we did have a couple questions that trickled in that you did actually answer as you were demoing. One of them being what cloud providers we support. You mentioned we do AWS, Azure, and GCP. And then one question that did come in is, are the checks that you had showed focusing only on security findings?
Right. So here, let me just share one more again here. So you can do security findings, and a lot of folks do focus on that pillar when it comes to the well-architected framework. I know when the well-architected framework came out, I think it was 2012. It was when I was first starting my career, and we were actually pulling a company out of AWS that we had acquired. The well-architected framework was just this kind of like methodology, and it was kind of up for interpretation, I guess you could say. So the pillars like security, use least access, make sure that your keys are rotated regularly. You're not using the root user, all the generic stuff. But cost optimization, reliability, and performance efficiency was kind of like there's a learning curve to it. So it's not just security that we're looking at. There are security findings, and we kind of group them down by each individual check. On what you can do for security, such as the EBS volumes being encrypted is a huge security risk. S3 buckets that are open to the public via policy is a big security risk. But if you're not looking for those kind of configurations, or let's say you get to 100% compliance on that, you can move on to something like cost optimization. Here's a bunch of EBS volumes that I'm running or that I'm saving that are not doing anything for me, but eating up the trend budget, or your EBS volumes are too old, or you have unused AMIs that are sitting there. These are all things that you can optimize in there as well as OE and performance efficiency, definitely.
Awesome. Thank you. So I think that covers everything else. Somebody had asked about integrating to Jira, and you covered that as well with all the communication channels. Yep. I'm not sure if you wanted to kind of cover off on anything else on that front.
I think that's true. Yeah, the Jira channels. You can also integrate a channel into there. Like I said, I have done a lot of these deployments with customers that are using this in production, and it's all about either a team that's looking at the tool, right, or the tool interacting with a team. Right. That's really what it comes down to is, and the IDE plugins, of course, are features that folks are utilizing that are really helpful from an infrastructure as code perspective, being able to scan before you deploy and get the feedback and go in and, there's one line in here that references, an SQSQ that's not encrypted, add a KMS key for that SQSQ. Easy enough to do before. Maybe a painstaking, depending on how you deploy into AWS after, right? I've recently worked with an organization that doesn't utilize the AWS console at all. They only deploy through pipelines, right? So going and making a change after the fact can be cumbersome, at least, at the least, right? So the communication channels are great. I do have one customer that I referenced that does do the team communications where they'll have a Teams channel set up that goes to their security team for all misconfigurations that get stood up. But then they'll also have email channels that we use that query box to query down the findings. I can show you guys what I kind of mean by that is if I browse all checks, I can actually filter down checks. I may not have a tag to search here, but if I do like maybe lab, I should have one for the lab 2, for example. I might not have anything set up there. I do. So here's a S3 bucket that I actually stood up using a CloudFormation template. It has a tag of lab 2. I can send that notification that this S3 bucket is, misconfigured from policy to an email address that maybe it's an email address that for the owners of lab 2, right? That's exactly what we're trying to accomplish there.